turn now to Peter German, lawyer and former RCMP Deputy Commissioner who worked in the Professional Standards Directorate. Good morning to you, sir. Glad that you could be with us to offer your expertise. What elements are the RCMP looking at in order to determine what happened and the shooter's motive?
Yeah, good morning, Marcia. Well, obviously, this is not a whodunit. We know who did it. It's a question of why. And so to a certain extent, that's a police investigation, but it's going to be a broader investigation in terms of the criminal justice system generally, mental health supports, and the history of the perpetrator here. So right now, the RCMP are collecting evidence. They're doing everything that you would at a normal crime scene. This is hardly normal, admittedly, but that is what they're dealing with. And as the Deputy Commissioner mentioned yesterday, they want to make sure that there were no other parties to the offense, that no one else contributed in any way, i.e. in supplying firearms and that sort of thing. Hopefully, they will determine that this was a sole actor, and then it eventually becomes a coroner's case.
A coroner's case? What does that mean?
Well, in that if there are no charges to be laid against anybody, the perpetrator is dead, no one else committed an offense, allegedly, then really the police involvement is at an end, and then it's a question of the coroner deciding how did these fatalities occur and what is the background and so forth, because that will not necessarily be answered by the police alone.
There were 2 weapons involved. We also know that the shooter had a history with police. Can you talk to us about the questions now that will be asked about those interactions in the past between the suspect and police?
Sure. Those are going to be very relevant, obviously, on 2 levels. As you mentioned, the firearms. You have what appears to be a restricted firearm and a long gun. So the police are currently attempting to determine the origin of those guns. They apparently were removed, or guns were removed from the perpetrator at one time and returned by court order or some other process. We don't know that. So obviously they're going to look at the background of the firearms. They're also going to look at the background in terms of the mental health apprehensions when the perpetrator was taken to a hospital for assessment, apparently on a few occasions. So the police brought the individual to the hospital. What happened there, and why was the individual released? Most people are released in those circumstances, either with medication or once it appears that they are stable. But those are all the types of questions that the police the police files will be relevant, but they will not necessarily have the answers.
Peter, we know that many students were in a lockdown. They were inside that school for more than 2 hours as they listened to shots being fired. They were sheltering in place. As part of the investigation, will they need to interview students? And I ask that because I think a lot of people would be wondering, given all the trauma that they have already been through, will police be talking to them as well about what happened in those hours at school?
Yeah, there's really 2 aspects to this. So first of all, you're talking about a very small community with a very small RCMP detachment. We don't know right now how many police officers were working on the day shift, but if there were more than 2 or 3, I'd be very surprised. So some very courageous acts took place as they ran against gunfire into the school and then located all of these deceased parties. In terms of your direct question, will the students have to be interviewed? Obviously, some will be interviewed, but it's going to be done in such a way to respect their mental health concerns. It'll be trauma-informed. This is not, a case of interviewing people with a cold light in a room, an interview room. Any interviews that do take place will take place. I would almost guarantee you in a very well, as I say, trauma-informed manner. And hopefully it is only those that had, were eyewitnesses that will have to be interviewed. Those that were sheltering in place really all that they can contribute is what they heard. So to what extent it'll be necessary to interview them, I don't know, but certainly of lesser importance than those that were actually affected and impacted.
I really appreciate you answering that question like that, Peter. Thank you for that. I do want to ask you lastly about social media. There is a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there about the trans community, about the shooter. But nonetheless, we know from the past that investigators look into social media when it comes to trying to understand a suspect. So how will they sift through what is fact and what is fiction?
Sure. So first of all, it's about the victims, as you've already mentioned in the broadcast. It's not. We have to avoid the discussion moving into other realms, such as the transgender community and so forth. We know that the perpetrator identified as a female. Fine, she was responsible for what took place here. And I think that the police, you could tell from the commanding officer that he was trying to deal with that issue by, in fact, using the pronoun she. So the whole idea being this isn't about transgender people necessarily. It may be relevant to a certain extent with regard to her background. Oh, we may find that out over time. But in reality, this is about the victims. This is about a criminal act that took place. And that's where the emphasis is going to be. And for now, all the politicians are doing the right thing. They're not getting involved in the police investigation. They're not dealing with tangential issues at this time. They're dealing with the victims, and that's what they should be doing.
Yeah. Keep the focus where it should be. Peter, I really appreciate you taking the time to offer your expertise and your analysis this morning. Peter German is a lawyer and a former RCMP deputy commissioner.
Thanks, Marie.